Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. It's my first visit to PRONI, and I'm very, very happy to be sharing this unique experience with you today. My name is Tom O'Connor, and I am from Maynooth University. And what I'm going to do is briefly give you a peek under the bonnet, under the digital bonnet of the of this project. I think it's important that we have some idea of where it came from, which gives us an idea of what it's about, and perhaps even can predict where it might go in the future. Now, this project, and I think it's one of the ironies of it, is that it began as an effort to record a particular legacy. And that legacy was that of the Roman Catholic clergy in Ireland in the period between basically the Reformation and the French Revolution. And one of the principal sources that we were looking at concerned the student lists of St. Patrick's College in Maynooth, which, as you know, is a seminary, now a university in North Kildare in Leinster, about half an hour or so from Dublin. Now, what we decided to do with the data we had, and I'll explain the various types of data we had, was we wanted to develop a system which didn't just present the data as discrete individual pieces of information, but somehow to identify the links between the various pieces of information and to give people like you, the general public, researchers and anyone interested, the opportunity not just to explore one person in their individuality, but to explore that one person as a gateway to the whole network of institutions, events and other people who are associated with that single individual. And the nice word we have for this, which took me a long, long time to master, is prosopography. Prosopographical. Great fun with those words. So prosopography, simply, prosopon is the Greek for a face. We're beginning with a person's head. What's in it? And more importantly, how that head and what's in it and the body that carries it around is related to the whole network of institutions, people, places and events which make up that person's real lived experience. And in the end, we had 25,000 biographical entries, 4,000 digitized resources, or what historians call sources, where we got the information from, 300 registered dioceses, the Irish ones and ones all over the world, 5,500 unique last names, and relations. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. Now, why did we try to mount this project? We had two requirements, and you can see this happened in 2020. We were looking into COVID and what we were going to be doing for the next indefinite period of epidemical circumstances in the world. So what we wanted was, we wanted to provide a reliable, flexible and accessible digital platform to accommodate large quantities of biographical information on individuals and group of individuals. The really important thing about this information is that it's bits and bobs. There's no consistency to it. And this is the real challenge of getting a system that was going to permit us to bring this stuff together without deforming it. So we wanted to keep the integrity of the original data, but at the same time link it without misrepresenting it or the network into which it fitted. So the platform was required to cater particularly for the unstructured biographical data, typical of Irish professional and migrant populations. In fact, typical of populations in any era or in any time. Now, we had a pilot project to test this basic set of requirements on, and it was a unique resource or source which was preserved in St. Patrick's College, Maynooth, and that was the records of Maynooth College, as you know, a seminary and university located close to Dublin. You can see I have used this presentation already to speak to people who don't know where the hell Ireland is. But we do in this room, I hope. Now, so, first shock, what is the primary source we're looking at? And we had a wonderful source. And this was a set of records which were photographic as well as manuscript. Okay? And they covered a period of more than 200 years, beginning in 1795. Obviously, photography was not in its infancy, it was in the pre-in vitro stage in 1795, but we did have student lists. We had a collection then of 124 of these things, which are called class pieces. They're graduation photographs for Maynooth College, from the beginning of photography right up to the day before yesterday. And each class piece consisted of headshots of graduates accompanied by their names and their dioceses of origin. So these are the information points we had, arranged in various formats within rectangular frames. You can see digital people got to work on this. Some of the latter artifacts being of potential significance for art historians. I mean, the very frames of some of these were extraordinary works of art. Now, that was one. So we had the photographic record. Secondly, we had a student list which had been drawn up by a professor called Joey Hamill. We had that in a print version. Now, Joey Hamill did print pages like he wrote letters to his aunt. They were absolutely crowded to the edge with information, and he was constantly sticking pieces of information in. I needn't tell you that for anybody remotely connected with digital humanities, bits added in, out of sequence, out of order, and not according to format are deadly and are a justification for mass murder, because it drove us absolutely crazy trying to accommodate these details into the system. And you can see that's Joey's version, and believe me, that's a clean one. And we converted them into that. Richard did. Mary mentioned Richard. Now, the digitisation of the new college class pieces was the pilot, okay? We collaborated with historians, you know all of that, and archivists. And we developed, just the third point there, a series of work packages. Now, what were the work packages? These are little pieces of work. We say, we're going to do this number 1, this number 2, and this number 3. It's sort of a work plan. And we had various packages to cover artifact identification. Okay? Finding out where our class pieces were, you wouldn't believe how many of them weren't where they should be, and how many we discovered that nobody knew had survived at all. First up. Secondly, their preservation. Lots of these class pieces were in a really bad condition, faded, water damaged, neglected. So this was an important record of where these were at a particular time and what needed to be done about them to preserve them. Data extraction. We couldn't take all the data out of the sources. We had to decide what data are we going to extract and how this was to be ingested into our system, how new pieces of information would enrich what we already had, and these were the various work packages we developed and implemented. Now, technical infrastructure, this is the bit that terrifies me. But I have explanations here of the things that you will need to know. Just the second point there, the technical infrastructure, just to know what the technical infrastructure is. There are 3 parts to it. The first of all is called a server API. Do not worry yourselves about this. It is a thing called an application programming interface, and that is what senior technical officers look at and look after. I have no idea myself if that went wrong or was working. But anyway, it is a crucial part of the whole outfit, and that's why we have technical people who know what it is. Secondly, we had a content management and administrative interface. Now, this is really important because for Robin and for Richard and for the people who are actually working on the project itself, they have to be able to dialogue with the technology, okay? And they also have to be able to dialogue with the technical experts. And that's where those conversations happen. The last thing then we needed was a content delivery public interface. When you click, looking for Joe Blogs on the website, that's what that is, where you actually interface and dialogue yourself as a researcher or as an interested person. Now, we also had an Neo4j graph database. Now, what the hell is that? A graph database is a simple and a wonderful thing. It uses the language of graphs, which we all did at school, and happily, as Sue Ellen used to say in Dallas, so often that part of my life is over. But they do intrude into reality every now and again. And what this does is it deals with data as if it was a graphical diagram. Okay? So you have nodes, you have edges, you have points. And what that does is it gives the data enormous flexibility for finding out what is related to what else. Instead of just having one dimension of the data, you have multiple dimensions. And that's basically all we need to know about a graph database. Now, we had to evolve a second thing, which was a data model. Now, again, no need to frighten the horses. All that refers to is developing a way of dealing with the data which is appropriate to the data in question. In other words, we're preserving what's there, but we're relating it in the maximal way possible with all the other data. So we wanted simplicity, the simplicity of the original data. Secondly, we wanted flexibility, because we didn't know where this was going to go or what new data was going to become available. And thirdly, we wanted extensibility. So this was a pilot. We knew that if this was going to be worth its salt at all, it would have to be applicable to a much broader population than the students of St. Patrick's College in Maynooth. So we decided, like most people when they're doing databases which involve human beings, we were going to have 4 primary entities. An entity comes from graphs. Okay. First of all, we're going to have a human being, a person. That was a name. Okay. Secondly, we were going to have a resource. We had found the name somewhere. Where did we find the name? That's this resource or source. Thirdly, there was an entity called organization. What organizations was the student in Maynooth associated with? They were associated with the college. They were associated with the Archdiocese of Dublin. They were associated with a mission in the Congo. They were associated with a parish in Kerry. Organization. And lastly, we had events. Life is full of events. We are born. Lots of us are baptized. We are sent to school. We suffer the boredom of boarding schools. We enter the rat race, etc., etc., etc. Events. We had to decide what the important events were, and we had to justify why we chose those events and not other ones. Now, events are all linked one to another. That's what we call a biographical progression. But as you know, all of them are related to a time and to a place. So those were 2 minor entities, time and place, which are interlinkable with the 4 major entities: person, resource, organization, and event. And lastly there in that, all meaningful entity types and relations had to be justified. So when we say that so-and-so was ordained by so-and-so in Maynooth, what did that mean? And does it mean, and then we had to have the inverse relationship, was ordained by. Everything had to link both ways, okay? And this is a picture of the data model. You can see we have our 4 main entities, and then we have the 2 minor entities, and you can see that the temporal one only is linked to events. So we link time, which is crucial in history and in life generally, through events. The event that happens, the person, the resource, and the organisations. Okay, and you can see the number of relationships possible is infinite, and every one of those relationships must be justified by what we call a taxonomy, another big word like prosopography, which refers to an essential single process in the whole enterprise of justifying why you chose that relationship and what that relationship actually means. We produced this well into COVID in 2020. Most people had survived the pandemic, at least in our team. So what did we get? We had a searchable database, we had an article publication platform, and we had three basic tools, which you'll see on the website. We had a heat map. It's a representation of the totality of the data. We had an events timeline for any individual in the database, and we had a network graph, which was that huge map of everything, and which everybody complains about because it's so slow to load. The reason why it's slow to load is because there's so much data in it, and the problem is not with the database, but it's with your machine. And with the state of technology in the world as we know it, I'm glad to issue that disclaimer. Now, we did a second pilot project. I say I'm coming up to the limit, and we decided, okay, we have the pilot, it's worked, let's try it with some new data. So we tried new data and data enrichment, and we took several disparate data sets to see how they were going to fit in. The Diocese of Meath, 16th to the 20th century, we had a list of those people. We worked with the Royal Irish Academy, tested the data model and the structural environment on cognate pieces from other institutions in Ireland. So we took St. Kieran's College in Kilkenny, which is older than Maynooth, 1782 to 1994, and then we decided to go on the continent and try and follow some of these people who went abroad. So we looked at the Paris student lists, 1578 to 1939, Lisbon, 1590 to 1837, and Salamanca, 1592 to 1630. You've no idea of the joy and also the frustration of dealing with these people in their Spanish, their Gaelic Irish, their English, their Flemish, French, etc. incarnations. It was an odyssey. Now, that was the Clerics project. News got round. Mary and I had a conversation, and we decided, why not try this on a completely different population, but one that is contemporary with clericals. So the Hunter Foundation, in its generosity, had made monies available, and we decided, let's try a non-clerical, non-academic population, settlers mainly from Scotland and England, who colonised the northern province of Ireland also during the period 1609 to 41. Okay, exactly what we're talking about today. January 2022 to January 2023, we processed over 14,000 individual records, multiple historical sources. Robin's going to talk about these in far more detail and with far greater expertise than I. The clerical's data model was modified to cater for the new data, and one of the basic things we did was, instead of having dioceses, which wasn't really going to work for the population we're dealing with, let's do estates, which is a much more meaningful organisation for the data in question, which is what we did. And we demonstrated the capacity to adapt the data model and the structures to this distinctive historical population. So the Clerical's digital platform does work, not just for the clergy, not just for the Ulster settlers, but for any early modern or contemporary population. Okay? Quad erat demonstrandum, QED. That was what I was hoping would happen, and largely it has, you know, with more or less difficulties. Now, what are we trying to do at the moment? We're trying to continue with the Hunter, and Robin's going to talk about what's been happening since 2023. We want to continue to ingest new data. Imagine if we could take all the data on the Church of Ireland, the Presbyterian, and all the non-conforming clergy, and put it into the Clerical's database, to expand it to include the totality of the clerical state and clerical activity would be a wonderful thing to do. All we need is tons of money. Of course, we're collaborating with researchers, research projects working in other historical populations, and technical collaborations, like using our databases as training environments for students, developing data ingestion tools, making the process quicker because we use more technology, enhancement of the visualization tools, which are quite basic. We'd love to do more work on them. Development of mapping capacity to facilitate linking layered historical maps. I mean, we have great maps in this country. Wouldn't it be wonderful to link the maps to the people, to the organisations, and also the development and refinement of those bloody taxonomies. In other words, justification for the relationships and why they work and how they extend. There are the two addresses. Please print them. Have them on your headstones and everywhere you can. We need all the publicity we can get. Could I thank you for your wonderful attention and your warm welcome, and I hand you over now without further ado to Robin. Thank you.
Okay, morning everyone. It's a great looking audience, delighted to see so many showed up. I'm Robin Usher, the Hunter Research Fellow at Queen's. And anyway, I'm going to get cracking. In 1996, a pair of archaeologists carrying out recording and monitoring work in Newry chanced on a remarkable discovery. While investigating medieval carvings lodged in the walls of a disused bakery, they established that the structure had incorporated the masonry shell of the fortified house built in the 1560s by Sir Nicholas Begnon. The uncovered remains corresponded closely to a set of elevation and plan drawings roughly contemporary with the house. Eventually, Begnall's castle, once the centrepiece of a garrison town that Lord Deputy Sidney had described as well planted, would be repaired and became a heritage attraction. This building would have been well known to the British and predominantly Welsh immigrants settled in the town of Newry and its hinterland in the early decades of the 17th century. The recent research of Rhys Morgan has documented the Flintshire dynasts who emerged as the ruling and landowning elite of a region that had previously been a stronghold of the McGuinnesses. We get something of a roll call of these settlers in the will of Marmaduke Whitechurch, written in 1634, which illustrates the family and spatial ties of an ambitious East Ulster newcomer. Sir Edward Trevor, whose Ivy estate was styled Ros Trevor in reference to his wife Rose Usher, features as a legatee, as do several of his blood relatives. Among them is Magdalen, a daughter of Edward's sibling Sir Richard, a soldier and one-time governor of Newry. Magdalen married Arthur Begnall, direct descendant of the builder of Newry's castle. Thus, by wedding the heir to the Begnall properties, Magdalen united two great Welsh gentry families. Her son with Arthur lived chiefly in Wales, where he was raised by Magdalen's second husband, another military man who had governed the garrison in Newry. Unfortunately, we don't know where and when Magdalen died. She may have fled Ulster in 1641 and returned to Wales. Before then, she must have witnessed some momentous events, such as the burning of much of Newry in 1600, or the large muster that took place in the shadow at Begnall's castle in 1603. Her marriage to Arthur Begnall in 1611 likely took place in the Newry church built by his grandfather. Later, the selection of MPs for the town following its incorporation in 1613 surely involved discussions in the great chamber of Arthur's castellated house, which in late 1641 was sacked by insurgents. But much of the foregoing is supposition. The few facts of Magdalen's life are diffuse and must be assembled from scattergun sources ranging from testamentary documents, fragmentary estate papers and antiquarian family histories, as well as some modern historical scholarship. Still, she is marginally better served than the other 800 or so women in Plantation Ulster for whom documentation exists. More often than not, their imprint on the record consists of simple mentions in rent rolls or in some judicial proceeding. On a different scale altogether are the British men who settled in the province between 1603 and 1641. Of the estimated 40,000 settlers in Ulster in about 1630, some 26,000 can be accounted for. Precise figures, unfortunately, will always be elusive. However, the purpose of the database is to tabulate the lives that can be accounted for. Tom has discussed the underlying architecture of the platform, outlining how its graph design allows for the fast retrieval of photographical data on individuals whose regional and kinship links are readily indicated in their entries. I'll talk about the sources used and how information from these enabled the entries to build over time. A quick preliminary is necessary. My predecessor, Richard Fitzpatrick, began the work with several massive ingests, beginning with places, working downwards from county to barony to estate to townland as necessary, and sometimes individual domiciles. If you were to search for a barony, for example Dungannon, the servitor and native estates are listed under organisations alongside parishes and so forth. Basic data on the 180 or so estates in the official plantation counties arises in the grants set out in the Jacobean patent rolls, as abstracted by George Hill in his invaluable source book that has shaped much of the historiography. Here is Lord Deputy Chichester's holding that comprised the coveted O'Neill seat of Dungannon town, whose castle was rebuilt from Chichester from about 1610, and Hill's summary of the grant is also given to show the kind of source that was used here. Quite a few of the estates tackled by Richard at this early stage are populated by the inhabitants' names as taken from the muster rolls of about 1630 that Robert Hunter had hoped to publish. In a lot of instances, these fencible men are not noticed in other sources. Yet since the rolls brought some 12,000 individuals, they formed the backbone of the database, insofar as this did not primarily concern landholding grandees and their families, but the kinds of tenants who worked the land, constructed the dwellings, and at times even manned some of the juries of assize. The four canonical plantation surveys, Carew, Bodley, Pennar, and the certificates of the 1622 Commission reiterate and develop on much of the information of the original plantation grants. Hill's extensive glosses on Pennar's survey of 1619 brings a lot of additional context extracted from the Chancery inquisitions bunched in the later 1620s. And this extract concerning the Annandale estate in Donegal names the mere Irish who held leases there. And these men are not mere ciphers. One could take Philemi McGilcare, who resurfaces in the estate rentals of the 1630s. The category of events that Tom has alluded to does need perhaps a little more explanation. It designates the appearance of a name in a dated source, such as a rental, a survey, or an inquisition, and therefore ties the individual to a date range. Predictably, the landowning county notables have the greatest number of these. Sir William Cole of Enniskillen, the subject of important research by Bob Hunter, has some 45 events giving a whole chronicle of his career as a county Fermanagh undertaker and much else. Some events are more colourful than others. In the recorded proceedings of the Court of Exchequer, known only from transcriptions by James Ferguson and used by Bob Hunter, Cole and 6 of his servants were summoned for duffing up an assistant to the High Sheriff of the county while attempting to recover seized goods. Hunter's research notes, which further enriched the database, covered the salved chancery bills at the National Archives in Ireland, which have proven highly insightful about property disputes, and not exclusively at the elite level. This case about possession of mills in County Antrim identifies litigants who are otherwise free-floating names associated with the sprawling estates of the Earl of Antrim. Looking at the resulting entry on Margaret Logan, the information in the Chancery Bill was sufficient to show that she resided in the Dunluce portion of the Antrim estate at the village of Bushmills, for which we can almost begin to get a sense of its population and occupational structure. While we're on the Earl of Antrim's patrimony, it's worth looking for a moment at how sources for the tenantries of the great estates register in the database. The source used here, a piece by Ian Montgomery in the Directory of the Ulster Historical Foundation, is based on the Antrim Estate Archive here at PRONI. It's a massive collection. While entering this data, for a start, the origins and editorial conventions of the source were placed in the description box at the top. Next, navigating to the People tab, the user can then click on any identity. This is Robert Barr. The location of his holdings are indicated, as well as his parish of residence. Other data found in the Chancery Inquisitions enables us to identify his heir, plus a namesake who may in fact be Robert Barr Sr. It's safer to speculate about a duplicate name in the same region than risk conflating multiple identities. This task became a bit onerous when research threw up some 44 James Hamiltons, several of which were relations of the James Hamilton, Viscount Clandeboy, and a little surprisingly, there were a mere 21 John Smiths, but many more if you spell Smith with a Y. Rent rolls became a major focus of data gathering for the second and current phase of the project. Quite a few have been published, and Hunter's research files here have made the database tasks a good deal easier. The richest scene, it appears, was the series of rent rolls relating to the manors of the livery companies in County Londonderry. Fairly typical was 1622 rental for the company of drapers, listing 28 tenants, plus the freeholder Sir Thomas Staples, who also held land on the estates of the haberdashers, vintners and mercers. The Crown confiscation of the Londoners' estate in 1635 had led to the compilation of the so-called Great Parchment Book of 1629, an index of all tenants who occupied the former company manors. Now available online, this was part of a digital windfall over the last 15 or so years, including the 1641 depositions and digitally archived manuscript sources from both national and regional collections. Source digitization, sometimes as scans simply uploaded to picture-sharing platforms, has included a growing body of visual resources. Annalie Margie will have a lot more to say about such sources, so I'll just stick to some of the material. Thomas Raven's well-known watercolour maps and views of the Londonderry estates have been digitised by Lambeth Palace Library, enabling their close study. In these, as with this survey of the Fishmonger's Manor or Walworth, the name of the head of each household is written by a schematic drawing of their actual residence. Each map or view joins the database as the aforementioned event. Here is Arthur Britton, who thus becomes a participant in an event in which his identity is noted in the source, namely the map. Additional sources like the Great Parchment Book or another annotated map copied by Hunter lets us know about Britain's spouses and some wider connections. Cartographical evidence for the inhabitants of Ulster's larger towns is somewhat scarce. Lisburn was mapped in about 1625 with some 50 tenants named on the plots they held. This document was possibly made for Sir Fulk Conway as an aid in compiling rent rolls. More often, the sources for urban lives, a specialism of Robert Hunter and Raymond Gillespie, are a touch pedestrian, but they can be used creatively. The rentals of the estates of the Archbishops of Armagh, covering the city and its liberties and transcribed in exhausting detail by T.G.F. Pattison, enabled us to populate Armagh in increments over some 4 decades. And this consolidation yielded some interesting findings. We get a catalogue of the children of Archbishop Henry Usher, that carpet-bagging peculator who preferred to squat in Drogheda or Termonfeckin than rebuild his own ruinous cathedral. Matthew, who also resided at his father's Meath estate of Balsoon, did rather well, holding lands in both Armagh City and County Tyrone. Rose Usher, we have met, she was Sir Edward, she wed Sir Edward Trevor and decamped to Newry. While this obvious feathering of nests is vaguely amusing, it is important evidence of internal chain migration triggered by the awarding of landed title to one paterfamilias. Family histories, typically the legacy of leisured 19th century antiquaries, have had some effect on research for the database. They can vary in quality. Ball's Usher Memoirs has some egregious errors, for example, and has been corrected in later scholarship. This account of the savages of the Ards, containing material based on lease books and wills, has much more enduring value, giving 50 new names to the database. Yet even then, we always have to sound a note of caution, as primary source material showed that some personal names had been erroneously merged, and it was no help to me that the preferred first name for men in the Savage dynasty was Roland. Similar issues presented with the otherwise invaluable clerical succession lists created by J.B. Leslie, who was rector of Kilsaran, the parish of Dromiskin in County Louth. Very often, Leslie, working with the 1622 visitations and sources like Henry Cotton's Fasti of cathedral personnel, was snared by name spelling variations, resulting in double and sometimes triple entries. But these were often cases of multiple benefices held by a single rector, and corrections had to be made while entering this material. I used the description box for the individual clerics to identify which benefices were held. In 1951, okay, that's Leslie, moving on. 1951 lists of the nascent Presbyterian divines, those who faced censure or deprivation in the 1630s or who settled in the following decade, were entered next, and it was made it made a lot easier data collection based on the memoirs of figures such as Patrick Adair and Andrew Stewart, whose autobiographies heralded a distinctive denominational tradition in life writing, and those have been recently republished by the Ulster Historical Foundation. The Irish Catholic Church has lacked a Fasti tradition, and the sources for them are mainly lists based on the registers of continental seminaries. At times, the information in these is vague about the priests' exact places of origins and subsequent movements when below the rank of ordinary or bishop apostolic, though the splicing of multiple lists, as well as contemporary documents such as the Jesuit annual correspondence, did bring clarification. Here is Cornelius Ward, references to him in the papers of the Scots Mission, brought definition to a part of the database that risks becoming a catalogue of just free-floating names. Ward must have resided for a time at the revived friary of Bonamargee, which had been supported by the Earl of Antrim, and William Rulston's most recent book, or one of the most recent books, co-authored with Tom McNeill, discusses the history of the building in this period and conveys a very keen sense of place. Life stories, at least as represented in a database like this, may not always be the raw materials of full dress biographies, but work carried out for the project showed that we can get enough glimpses of a population to attempt a pattern analysis or connect previously unconnected data, getting some sense of individuals and families and where they stood in this face-to-face society before the upheavals and displacements of the 1640s. Getting to the present point meant the systematic scouring of sources that varied in length and clarity, not to mention human interest. The incremental tagging of data points such as names, locations and so on allowed information to accumulate within discrete wells. William Dobbin of Carrickfergus, from the family that gave its name to Dobbin's Inn, one of the urban tower houses, is shown here, as is a sort of spider diagram showing his immediate personal connections. The number of sources now stands at 250, up to 200 since the beginning of the current phase of the project. And the work then is on time, above specification, and through a recently redesigned interface is available to all interested users to explore, be those historians or geographers, or community and school groups, or genealogists investigating the roots of any person or individual. I hope that their inquiries will be sped up by the webpage. I hope also that it is a worthy tribute to Robert J. Hunter, who sadly left the stage before his projected study of the English of Plantation Ulster could take shape. The platform, designed by Stavros Angelis of Maynooth University and adapted from the Clericus database mentioned by Tom, has mobilised much of Hunter's research, both published and unpublished, and should stimulate work that builds on his legacy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin, and you can get the sense by the figures he's just produced of the massive amount of work that Robin has done for the database, and I hope you've had a clear idea from Tom how it was structured and the main inspiration behind it from William, that is Bob Hunter. So we have a few minutes for questions. Would anybody like to ask anything or make a comment? Yeah, Brian.
Could I just add a word of
Maybe
welcome?
you should say who you
So
are.
Brian Lampkin, formerly Director of the Netherlands Centre for Migration Studies in Oma. Could I just offer a word of welcome to this project? It's absolutely wonderful. I'm still reeling from the enormity of Tom O'Connor's claim that this works for any population. I just wish we'd known about this 10 years ago when we were working on the CALM project, the Citizens Atlas for Local Migration. I would ask a question about mapping. Have you found a way of successfully mapping, visualizing the trajectory of any given individual?
Now, when you say mapping,
Well, it's
have you in mind?
spatially mapping and bringing time and space together in a map that shows the trajectory of an individual from all the known points, all the events,
Yes.
the known events in their lifetime.
yeah, now we have the information that will permit us to do that, but the visualization tools are not yet at the level of development required to do that clearly, rationally and consistently. But the information is there. It is, yes. But it's the last thing we did was the development of the visualization tools, you know, the other ways of looking at the data, giving a global picture, and that is at a less developed stage than other parts of the project. So it is possible, but not yet with the level of technical development. Yeah, thank you.
So Richard, I think, the first fellow, he did a lot of work trying to identify the townland places listed in the different sources, and he was trying to include maps that would include place. But I don't know if that's hasn't really been developed much beyond that. It is another, I suppose, stage in the process where it would be great. We're also looking at the original maps that Robin is talking about that are in Lambeth Palace or in the British Library or the National Archives in Kew or indeed in County Down.
Yeah. And to layer the maps,
Yeah.
Exactly.
the layering of the maps, and then to get them up to the Ordnance Survey, and
Yeah.
after the Ordnance Survey, and then to link that layered mapping with individuals or with groups of individuals. I mean, that is that would be the nirvana if we could ascend to those dizzying heights.
Yeah.
But it's possible. It is possible, and we have wonderful maps. And I think, from the point of view of pedagogy and just human interest, having the visual connection is absolutely essential, and it is a real means of deep engagement by the public, by students, and by anybody interested with the stuff. And that's how people are changed and come to a changed view of the world. So I mean, it's very important. But I'm hoping that we will have the possibility to do that in the future. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Okay.
On behalf of the Ulster Place Name Society and the Place Name Project in Queens, I believe that the database of townland and other place names now will let you search on a historic form. So if you put in your historical spelling that you think might be linked to the townland. Of course, money is always the problem, and I think that database needs a great deal more investment to develop it properly.
Yeah.
I and my colleague were made redundant when we were trying to get further with it. It's never had enough people since, and enough people trained in all the things that would be needed, geographical and historical and linguistic. It all needs to be there, as Brian well knows too.
Yeah. No, it's well said, because I know Richard particularly, was struggling with the different names of places and how they changed over time. So, the name of the townland in 1620 or whatever is not the same, obviously, as today, and he did his best to try and identify some of them, but you're absolutely right. It is missing.
The historical spelling should be there.
Yeah.
The ones that we've managed to squeeze through that pipe to get them into the online database. And I think anyone who works with online stuff knows there's always a backlog.
Yeah.
You haven't got a pipe big enough to push all the data through.
Yeah.
And I would say too that having worked on surnames and the history of surnames and the language changes there, there is also an enormous database of surnames, Irish surnames in Bruno, without current investment.
I think it's like, what's in all the different variations?
It does. We have all the variations, and that's been essential. I mean, that's one of the basic founding principles of the whole project, was that the resource would always be there to identify the different versions and where they were derived from. That's number one. Number two, I'd say to you, absolutely. If this is developed, we'll be able to say something useful, not only about the names, but about the evolution of the name, and how the name even sounded, or how it was sounded by contemporary populations. And thirdly, with regard to the perennial difficulties of funding and personnel, I mean, digital projects are like children. They never grow up, and they never leave home. They're always dependent on you handouts, seriously. And I mean, we forget this. Money is given for a project, and the project is done very well. And then it's stalled and it's left there. So it's been a problem all the time, and not just with digital projects. But you're absolutely right. Personnel and technical development, which of course is going forward at breakneck speeds now, you have to keep at least up with the posse, if not ahead of it. But their concerns we all have. But for the moment, as Mary said and Robin reiterated, I mean, Stavros, before he left us, did do a complete revamp, and we had a workshop on it, and it's in good shape as of now. But of course, things are changing all the time. But I hope it will be a sufficiently robust resource to justify the very generous investment of the Hunter Foundation and Queen's and the Academy and the Ulster Historical Society and all the individuals involved. And hopefully we will be able to continue with the project into the future and contain within it all the wonderful elements you've mentioned from the point of view of the other resources, which are cognate but not yet fully connected, interconnected rather, one with the other. Thank you.
And one of the reasons we welcomed working with Maynooth was that they're very conscious of the need to sustain computer databases, because so many of them, just after about 10 years, just become unusable. I mean, even the 1641 deposition website in Trinity had a lot of problems trying to update their software behind their database. And so they do have to be, as you say, cared for very carefully, yeah. And it is something you need to keep in mind when you're setting up a database, is how it's going to be maintained into the future. Anybody else like to? It's somebody down there at the back, yeah.
I'm just wondering what's the cut-off date for the plantation? Do we stop at 1640, or do we go a little bit further beyond that?
Well, the database stops in 1641 because that was really the interest of Bob Hunter was really up to 1641. I mean, ideally, of course, and I know Paddy will say this constantly, that the main, and most of you here probably who know anything about the history of Ulster will know, that the main influx of people from Scotland into the province was in the post 1660, maybe even 1680, 90 period. So ideally, yes, we would like to go into that sort of wider period. But again, apart from money, I'm not sure what sources we could use, but that would be suggestions.
One of the things that we discussed, speculatively, was, extending on to the, as you said, when the Scots come over in greater numbers at the end of the 17th century, but following the ones who went to America.
Oh, yeah.
It would be the only way to visualize these things would be digitally, because it's such a rich source environment. So that is a really attractive prospect. It really is.
David.
Yeah, just in terms of the actual technology that was kind of used, like it strikes me that an awful lot of the data that was extracted is from kind of published sources. Was it using kind of optical character recognition to kind of extract the data out, and just, I suppose, was there any technical difficulties in terms of how that was actually achieved, in terms of, I suppose, if it was a published source from, say, Hill from the 19th century or something like that, did it present difficulties of accuracy when it actually extracted the data, or?
Sometimes it could be straightforward cut and paste and then digitally tag as you're working, and then otherwise it was old school. I would simply read it and enter the relevant data, and then carry out the tagging. Nothing akin to text recognition technology or AI was used. Perhaps in the future it will be. The live project at Trinity, led by Jane Oldmayer, does use AI for data in connection using chancery recognisances, but there didn't seem to even be a need for our purposes.
In the clericus section, we did pieces of software to read the class pieces, and that was hugely difficult because you had a photograph and then you had different pieces of information not consistently placed on the platform, and then you had different languages. You had English version of the names, you had Gaelic versions of the names, and you had Latin versions of the names. Not only that, but you had the Roman script and you had the Gaelic script. Now we developed a tool which worked very, very well. The one we used for the Maynooth class pieces, we transferred and developed that for the Kilkenny ones, which were in a different format, and it worked very, very well indeed. And for Joey Hamill's impossibly spidery, added together, letter to my grannan format, it was a challenge, but we did develop an optical detection.
So it could actually sort out the irregularities.
Yes, which worked. And that was the advantage, as Mary said, of having a technical person on the team. So they knew what the historical need was and the text and manuscript source of it. And they also knew what the possible solutions were from the technical. So those were the two cases in the earlier iteration, but obviously they weren't needed then in the two more recent iterations.
Forgot to mention that earlier in the project, when looking at material in the state papers, I attempted to use transcribers to work more quickly through secretary hand, but setting it up and calibrating it was going to take more time than simply working through it using paleographical skills.
Yeah, I tried using it. It just takes longer.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up, or just beyond lunchtime. So we'll finish there, and thank you to the three presenters. Hope they've given you a good idea of what's going on.